Thanks for taking the time to download this Negotiating with the Power of Understanding live podcast, created for the Knowledge Network of Thunderbird School of Global Management. To find more information on how to be an effective negotiator, please visit Dr. Karen Walsh's online educational series on Negotiating with the Power of Understanding at knowledgenetwork.edu/Walsh. In this series, you'll find a variety of podcasts, online discussions, and other resources that will help you succeed in the toughest negotiations. Learn from global leaders their secrets on negotiations. Online around the world, this is Thunderbird Knowledge Network, negotiating with the power of understanding.
Hello everyone. We are gonna have an amazing panel for today. We're gonna discuss about what negotiation means to you. And we have these wonderful people here. I'm gonna introduce you first. We have next to me Jean Barst. He comes from London and he has spent a lot of his time in Germany as well. He is a 21st century leadership expert. He's a speaker on 20th versus 21st century leadership, and he delivers training in Asia. Judy Etundi, he's a Thunderbird MBA candidate. He has an Africa and Asia focus, and he's an ABC treasurer. He came to the US here he's from Cameroon, and he came here from France and Israel. Next to Judy, we have Dr. Karen Walsh. She's an associate professor and consultant here in Thunderbird School of Global Management. Her area of interest is cross-cultural negotiations and conflict management, and she has studied social change and development at the University of Wisconsin. And last, we have Gediminas Almandas. He studied in the Copenhagen Business School. He's a PhD fellow. He's from Lithuania, and he has an LLM from University of Bern. Thank you very much all for being here. We would like to start. My name is Maria Leopoulou, I should say that as well. I come from Greece, and I'm going to be the facilitator. I'm a certified facilitator by Thunderbird School here, so I'm going to facilitate this conversation today. So let's start this discussion by just everyone giving one sentence of what negotiation means to you, and then we'll move on to discussion about it. Would you like to start?
Sure. I mean, it's a big topic, right? But I've been racking my brains, and I think I would propose that for myself, negotiation is about working towards a win-win outcome. So it's not about one party becoming superior to the other. I think it's about both parties negotiating, feeling their way towards the win-win situation.
Well, I feel a little awkward since I'm the least credentialed person here. But if I had to give an opinion, I'd say negotiation is about moving forward, having different parties move forward toward a common goal, a common vision, whichever that one may be.
Yeah. I'm sorry, we're going to have to repeat, technical issues. Yes.
Okay, so I will repeat, yes. Negotiation, to me, is about moving forward toward a common vision, a common goal, shared, whose success is shared in by different parties that are present around the table.
Great.
And I agree, it's a very large topic, and I basically look at it as one fundamental human activity that we all have to do in our personal and our professional life. And the easiest way for me to think about it is if I have something that I need, but I have to work through someone else to get it, I'm in a negotiation situation. So that's what it generally means to me.
I would completely agree with what have been said, but I would say coming from a small country and living in a small country, negotiation for me is how I survive as a small person from a small country in a big world, how I live and how I cope with that. So that's the challenge, and that's the negotiation for me.
Great. Thank you all for your input. I'm going to read here from Professor Dr. Walsh's book here. It says, we all negotiate whenever we first need to share or divide limited resource, Second, want to create something new that requires another's help. Or third, want to resolve a problem with someone. I think more or less we've all agreeing with all these ideas here. What do you think, giving some expertise from your own country, let's discuss about what negotiation, how negotiation goes in your country, what does it mean to your fellow citizens? Yeah, you can start with the minutes, yeah.
You would say what negotiation mean to the fellow citizens? The question probably may also sound like how people understand negotiation, or what the mental, what the mentality differences, what the social differences in negotiation. So what I really observed in my practice in Switzerland, Lithuania, and Denmark, all those countries, people are very flexible in a sense. So negotiation for them and sharing of the resources means really sharing but not taking, and this imposes certain principles or certain way how the people negotiate. So openness, high trust level, respect of the values. That's what's pretty typical for small countries, and that's what I really observed in my life there.
I'm very interested by what Gediminas said. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Please excuse me, because he mentioned that he comes from a specific history of a country that's at times been swallowed up. Lithuania, which had a history of being swallowed up between Russia and Germany, and that affected his particular outlook on how to negotiate. Negotiation for them is a way of life and actually survival, and I relate that to my experience as a Cameroonian and as an African, because one could argue that the challenge for Africa now is the challenge of switching to a society of negotiations, whether it's in the economy, in the politics, and even in relations with other countries. Whereas since independence and since before independence, Africa was defined by more relationships of command. You know, even after independence, there were lots of big men took power and wanted to reorder society according to their rules, and to the rules that they wanted to intervene, which were not always in sync with how Africans function. What are the traditions? What are the historical traditions of the country? So negotiation I think it's a very fundamental concept to us as Africans, because it's of course about politics, about you talked about sharing, being flexible. That's the essence of democracy, negotiations, having deals, moving forward by having deals. But I think it's also a question of how do societies function. You know, when you have a larger free market, when the state is not in command of the economy, how does it function? How do different ethnic groups, there are 250 of them in Cameroon, that's 250 not only ethnic groups, but languages, each with its own traditional kings, its own traditions, its own history, because the history of Africa being as it is that each state was carved up from pre-existing states, and the reality is that people haven't forgotten about that, and that reality survives. So how do you go forward, how do you create growth, etc.? You negotiate, and that's our challenge. And you talked about it being an element of survival for you. That's a challenge, and I think also a question of survival, including in Africa.
So yeah, Dr. Walsh and Jan, what's your take? Do you feel, coming from London and the US, does negotiation mean survival for you, or what's the?
Are we negotiating then I go? Right, okay.
Negotiated with
Okay, right. I think that was like command negotiation, right? I actually think that they're very interesting points. I hadn't considered those perspectives, but you made me think about, so last year in August in London, there were huge riots, right, that had not been seen for a generation even, I mean, you know, and the big difference though was that no one really knows why they really happened. You know, I mean, okay, there's always tensions and stuff in London, but it seemed to be just more just random looting and just going out there and just having a blast and looting basically and rioting. And I think that there's one of the things that, from my perspective, sort of in 21st century leadership in this sort of new generation, is I see a lot of negotiation breaking down. I think particularly in Western society, you know, I mean, if you look at the US, the gridlock between the Republicans and the Democrats, if you look at to see the EU, what's happening there and trying to manage this financial crisis and move forward, if you look at sort of London society and British society faces a lot of challenges, I see sort of a continuous common theme of negotiation breaking down. And instead what's happening is that there's sort of this, people becoming entrenched in positions, they're unwilling to negotiate this sort of win-win, they're unwilling to sort of come to the table, instead they're just standing firm at what they believe and they'll just fight it through. So it's almost like when you're saying that Africa needs to step up to negotiation, I sometimes wonder if maybe we're falling back from the negotiation and are falling away from what took us forward. Maybe you have some ideas on that.
Well, I think you can all see why I study this field, because what you've just described here is what I am the most interested in. And when I think as an academic who studies what negotiation is, we basically have 3 criteria, whether you're in a negotiation or not. The first is, are the parties in some kind of interdependent situation? And your example showed us that when you both need each other, all of these various groups need each other and you need to share limited resources, you can convert that into a negotiable situation. So the sharing and the mutual needs is important in that situation. In Africa's situation, before independence, a lot of things were non-negotiable. So now what's converted in your continent is turning into a negotiation situation. We're going to need these skills to be able to manage in this environment of limited resources and limited opportunities and voice. And the other criteria for negotiation is we are using nonviolent means to resolve our disputes. And what we're finding is because of increased interdependencies, and the forces toward increased protectionism, we're going to become more entrenched. More limited opportunities and resources and voice is going to create need for better skills for negotiation.
Yeah.
And that's why I see what's happening on the international level. We need to understand the cultural mindset of your countries, your country, our countries, your country too, Maria. A lot to say about what's going on in Greece as well. That this is a time when we really do need to increase our negotiation skills. And what I'm interested in is how do you develop the skills around power with each other as opposed to power over one another when we have these kind of complex situations. So I think it's important to understand where we've all come from in our own cultural mindset and how we've been acculturated to think about negotiation.
So let me ask this question now. What does power with mean to you?
Are you asking me, or should we ask the panel?
Yeah, we can start
Let's start with Gediminas. Oh, with me.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
that's
she's
right.
negotiating with me right now.
I'm yeah.
And for me, that means that I am going to understand, first of all, what is it that I need? And often what I find is that a lot of people don't really know what they need. And that means both on a personal level and on our needs level. I need to be respected. I need to be included. I need to feel secure as I go through this negotiation, as well as getting the best price or getting the best agreement. So that's the first piece, that if I'm going to create any power with you and to understand you, I need to understand myself first. And then to really explore what is it that you need, and then let's work with each other to actually create more resources and opportunities. It looks like it's a limited resource situation, but we can actually convert it to one where there are a lot more options and a lot more opportunities. That's what I mean by power with.
This distinction that Dr. Walsh makes between power and force, I would say this is the exceptional thing, like understanding what's the difference between power and force. Like force sounds something imposing, or and power is something more creating. So in my understanding, and what we see in the world today quite a lot is creativity in negotiation sometimes is actually annulled or changed with destructive force, and this is a let's say essential difference. If the understanding of negotiation, if the mindset of people would be directed towards the power and using that power, but not the force, that would the changes can be really huge, like in creative side of things, but not really in destroying. So I really like that distinction, and I think this is a crucial understanding in negotiation.
Can I jump in on that? I think, I mean, what you made me think about was that For me, sort of, I somewhat take it like a philosophical approach to leadership, and I think about it in terms of sort of this I-you divide, right? And I think that the role of a leader is to create the we, because I think that's so often assumed as just that we word is just thrown around, and it's such a profound idea, but sometimes it's not given enough thought. And I think that sort of working with, negotiating with, and that sort of directing that creative capacity can only come from a we, that we recognize each other as one, rather than seeing each other with a boundary between us as me and as you over there. And I think that's really the key to recognizing how to work together and negotiate with, is to create the we.
Well, I think Jan Gediminas and Professor Walsh said it exactly. Power with is about we, and it's about creating more, actually. Out of finite resources, out of finite circumstances, we move forward to something that is not only equitable, but is actually more, is actually better, will actually propel us forward. And Jan was right to emphasize on the we portion. Like leadership is about, out of many, e pluribus unum, out of many one goal that will profit to us all. And being a leader is about creating that, and that is only through mediation, through negotiation. And it's the essence of it. That's what power with is.
So we're discussing, we're saying first we need to understand ourselves, then explore what the other needs, and then we work together. We're talking about creativity in negotiations. We're talking about, instead of I and you divide, stress about the we, so we can have like creative more, right? When would you, however, feel that you are weak in a negotiation environment? Would you feel that if the other party is probably stronger in negotiation, then it hurts your ego? Or what would put you in a difficult position during the negotiation?
Well, we talked about the we, but it could actually be said the other way around. E pluribus unum, but there are pluribus that has to be dealt with. And any negotiation starts always with specific interests, specific people with specific strategies, which they need to satisfy. Whether it can be survival, it can be profit, it can be pride, etc. You name it. So when negotiating, this is necessarily going to create conflict. And this may seem contradictory to creating the we and the power with, but I'm not necessarily against conflict. I think if it's understood that it's part of negotiating, conflict isn't necessarily bad. Well, let me rephrase that. Confrontation isn't necessarily bad. Sometimes you need confrontation of points of views of interest to realize that there's a third way, there's a better solution. Sometimes that is necessary, and that is part of the process. The trick is, how do you manage it so that it stays manageable and so that it actually moves forward. And God knows that's the trick today, because layers of authority is so fragmented at every level. So you have to create a vision, a we, but you have to also account for the fact that in the process of creating that we, and those actually multiple we's, you will have to manage those frictions.
For me, the difference between weakness and strength in a negotiation is I think it's a wrong concept. It's not about finding the weaknesses and strength. It's finding about the creative solution. So if you impose to other party a weakness, then you're not going to come to creative solution. Then you come to distributive negotiation, and then you actually facing conflicts. And as you said, it's not about a conflict, it's about a confrontation. So confrontation is not good, conflict is bad. So going the way of weak and strong in negotiation is a wrong concept. Because we are finding a conflict. We should find a confrontation. And that's about equality. Scandinavia is pretty famous for equal or equality promotion. And that brings a high level of trust. That actually leverages negotiation, and then people are able to find a creative solution. They use a power in that in that negotiation, energy to create something, and not a force, not force imposing a weak position or a strong position. So I think this is just a wrong concept.
Jan, what do you think? Do you think that there is weak and strong in negotiation, or?
I think yes. I would challenge that. I think there is, but I think what I've been trying to sort of like fine tune this down to is basically what kind of negotiation is this, and particularly your idea of the small and the great. You know, is this a situation where someone's just trying to dominate you? They're not opening themselves to the we idea. They're saying, I want this, I want to get this, give it to me, or else, basically. Or is there a presence in which there's an openness to accommodating and trying to find a way forward? If it's just pure strength, I think the world is like that sometimes. Survival is not necessary; it has to be fought for. And the reality is that sometimes you need to carry a big stick, so to say. Walk softly, carry a big stick. And I think a lot of the idea of negotiation that has really helped me is to recognize, most battles can't be won. Most battles are not important. So use your awareness and sort of find the right battles to win, so to say. Don't exhaust yourself and make yourself so conspicuous fighting everyone and fighting everything. So I think an important part of negotiation is setting yourself up to succeed in the first place. Don't go into a negotiation that you can't win or aren't in a position of strength. And then if it's sort of a less hostile negotiation, a more sort of like, more amiable kind of situation, then I think you can have more, that trust becomes more important, where you trust in sort of making yourself a bit more vulnerable, showing, well, this is what I'd like and this is what I'm prepared to compromise on. But like you said, it requires trust, and I think that trust is the key to an open negotiation.
This is very interesting because it reminds me of my days in graduate school. These great discussions about power in general. And this reminds me of what I learned in political science, is that fundamentally if you have limited resources, then one needs to win and other will lose. And it is all about who has the structural authority, who has the most political power, legal power, positional power, social power, economic power. That is what is going to get you what you want in a negotiation, because it is inevitable that there's conflict. Mm-hmm. However, then I learned about social psychology. And psychologists would say it's not the limited resources that creates conflict, it's our perception about those conflicts and those limited resources. So, as you said, how do we manage the conflict? How do we build trust? How can we manage these limited resources and change our perception? Even if it may appear as if there are limited resources, we can change our perception about how to share and manage those resources. Mm-hmm. And conflict is inevitable only in the way that we look at the situation.
Mm. So, Dr. Walsh, let me ask you that. Do you believe that even if the perception is that you're actually going to lose probably for that battle, maybe you shouldn't go, as Jan was explaining before, do you think that with training in negotiations and understanding really the, this social psychology, you can even become better if you're from the business world, or if you're a lawyer, or even if you're a child, I guess,
Yes, yes, and yes. All of the above. And that's why I've devoted my life to this topic, because I have seen people who come in that think they have the most limited resources and limited opportunities. And I think my favorite cases are Afghani women, that structurally speaking, they have the least power in the world economy. And I have seen them take some of the negotiation principles and create enormous power and opportunities in their life. And it was just a matter of just tweaking a little bit about how they saw their situation. And there are ways to prepare. Think about your alternatives. Think about the psychology and how I'm behaving in that negotiation so I can increase my leverage in that situation. Yes, yes, and yes.
I'd like to ask you, where do you think courage comes into this?
Well, I think the courage is to make the choice to prepare. Because once you've done the preparation and you take the initiative to do your own preparation and to look at what your alternatives are and really understand who the other party is, the rest of it's easy. Mm-hmm. Well, that's a relative term. But the courage is in making the choice that you're not going to be a victim in that situation, right, or just default to coercive or force techniques, which lead generally to impasse or very unsatisfactory outcomes. Mm.
But that example Professor Walsh has just mentioned about the Afghani woman negotiation. So that I would put a question behind there. do they have any other option? Like, so if they would not negotiate, would they be able to survive, or what can they do in their life without negotiation? So fighting is actually is not an option, and I would want to challenge the concept of negotiation as a battle, or negotiation as a winning a war or battle. This is actually we see many examples, especially in the region of Afghanistan and Iraq, is not about not the one who wins or wins in the short term actually is satisfied with the results. That there may be a lot of countries behind that metaphor, but without saying the names, the question is a negotiation really a battle? And is it about a winning, or just being satisfied with the result? So I would say it's much more about not a win-win concept, which it may sound revolutionary. It's about being satisfied with the result. And when you're satisfied with the result, it's a long-lasting result, and it's a result which everybody stick to and try to implement and perform. So I would say that example shows me that it's not a negotiation, it's not a battle. It is actually a survival thing, is a everyday life operation, we can say, and it's about being satisfied, but not a winning.
I agree with everything that's been said, but if I may just qualify what Gediminas just said. Well, before we started filming, we talked about Machiavelli and his influence, and you were talking about negotiation as not a battle. I was reminded of that Clausewitz quote, "War is the continuation of politics by other means," which a lot of people forget can also be written. It's basically an equation. But like all equation, it can be written in the other way. Politics is the continuation of war by other means. So a negotiation, basically, per our purpose today, a negotiation can be a battle, just like a battle can be a negotiation, depending on the circumstances. And which brings us back to how, depending on the circumstances. So depending on the circumstances, you will have to have different skills to either manage the conflict or manage the absence of conflict and the negotiation. And you have to identify those areas. I think in the case of the Afghan women, they're literally inside a war zone. And they used their negotiation skills, their weakness, as a weapon of war, as a weapon of survival, as a weapon of quantifying and multiplying their influence. And we get back again to Lithuania. That's a trick Lithuania has had to master because it was living, you know, it was a halfling among giants. Actually, less than a halfling among giants. You know. If you look at Lithuania in relations to Germany and the former Soviet Union, and but that's a trick that many countries are starting to find out about and to learn about. Of course, in Africa, but you know, Jan talked about the fact that even in Europe, people have to, and even in the U.S., we have gridlock situations where people think of negotiating as battle, as war, politics as war. These are, you know, the situation, the circumstances we have to navigate through. So it's, although we would all prefer, obviously, you know, situations where we don't think of our relationship with others as conflict. But the reality is, as Professor Walsh says, conflict exists. It will happen. It does happen, but it needn't be the bottom line, and it needn't be catastrophic. If it can be managed and if you can identify the circumstances, which different tools would be necessary.
I would like to finish up our conversation for today with some brief comments about what's the role of trust in turning negotiations into a place of not a battle, but of a creative solution. Just some brief comments of everyone. What's your take, Jan? Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I think you know, trust is vital. I mean, it's cliche to say that, but it's so true. And I think, you know, what we see, particularly from my perspective from the West, we see a breakdown in trust. We see a breakdown of trust in our leaders. We see a breakdown of trust in our business leaders. And I think that's one of the main reasons why people are unwilling or becoming less willing to negotiate, because they just don't have that trust that something's really going to happen. They're fed up and they want to go out there and do something about it. And I think at the same time, the challenges that we face in the 21st century are monumental. this whole sustainability concept will become ever more important, and we will need to negotiate our way towards that as a global population, right? And so the thought I would like to end on is just this idea of, for me, there's sort of 3 stages of leadership that need to be attained. First of all, it's about existence. You've got to negotiate that you become recognized, that you exist as an entity. Then it's about survival. That's the next step up. So now you're existing, but how well are you surviving? And then third, it's about creating a better future. So you move beyond just the day-to-day. You're now looking towards the future. How can we build a better world? And who's that we? Because then you start realizing, as you pursue the better world, it's not just about your world, it's about the world within the greater community in which you live. And so I think that trust comes different at those different levels, right? It's always present, but if you're fighting for existence, that's a different battle to fighting towards a better future. They're both extremely important, but I think different approaches are needed. But trust is definitely important for that.
Again, let me emphasize that I am the least credentialed person here, so I feel, I'm at the table. I'm very happy to be at the table with
we are very happy
with
to have
those with people here. So my opinion will have only the value that it has. But I completely agree with what Jan has said, and my takeaway from it is that trust has to be built. Trust has to be built, and trust has to it has to be built to and satisfy each party involved in any type of negotiation or relationship or interaction. Different elements, different constituencies of that party. There's acknowledgement, there's survival, and then there's the leadership. So a negotiation is about all of those aspects. And to the extent that there is difficulty and there is friction with each of these aspects in one party, which with that of another, you will have friction. So manage, but trust is built. Yes, it's long term and it's built, and trust is also and trust is about, because it touches what we most hold dear. He talked about acknowledgement, talked about survival. Literally, trust is a matter of survival, and it's a matter of also moving forward.
I agree with all of the above. And I would just like to add that from the work that I've done all over the world with people who are trying to learn to negotiate and get more of what they want, create more empowerment for themselves, one of the elements that I found that is the most critical, which we tend to overlook, is the more that you trust yourself and know who you are, what your value system is, why you're attached to certain belief systems, that kind of trust in yourself and integrity and alignment within yourself helps us to be able to trust others. Because we have our own issues of security, insecurity, of not being included and being disrespected. And once we basically have our own grounding and sense of that, we're able to trust others. So I think a lot of your own self-work is important. Self-awareness is absolutely critical.
Having the privilege of last word in this discussion, I would say I would love still to challenge understanding of trust in a concept of negotiation as a war. Let me ask you an open question. Can trust exist in a war situation? I think not. So if we are talking about negotiation as a war, that's an insecure situation. I would not believe that the trust can exist. If trust cannot exist, and it's a crucial element for creativity, for people sharing something, so I would not agree with the concept negotiation as a war in this case, because we don't create anything. We just either share or destroy it. So trust element is crucial here, and then we discuss it in a certain environment, and then we define negotiation in the light of trust.
I'm not sure this is actually a point, but while you were speaking about the question is trust possible in the context of a war, I was reminded of a conversation we had with Jan, where we were talking about the Second World War, and we were reminded about the famous quote that Stalin never trusted anyone in his life except Hitler, and he was wrong. And you can also, many historians have established that I think the exact quote is the the history of coalitions is the history of the reciprocal complaints of all the allies, which is so true in the case of the Second World War. You can go back to Napoleonic times and even to the ancient Greeks and their fight with Persians. So it's a very vast question. How do you create trust in the context of a war, which by definition is about not having trust, is about mistrust? There are libraries full of.
Yeah, we can take. I would hate to close the discussion without hearing the input of the other two guests that we have here. So yeah, let's take another few minutes. I hope you will excuse us for the overtime. Jan, what's your take? You talked about the existence before different stages. What's your take if there is war and trust is so crucial for negotiation?
Yeah, I mean, I think Gediminas, nails it on the head completely. That is the basic challenge, and you can see that. What drives creation of wealth, right? It's exchange. Trusting each other to exchange goods, exchange ideas, work together, collaborate, exchange resources, share scarce resources. And you can see that when in a war, which is the most extreme state, there's no trust at all. Or when there's complete anarchy, again, there's no environment for trust, right? So wealth cannot be accumulated. So I think that in terms of, I wouldn't say negotiation is like a war. I don't think it's like that. I think there are elements of conflict within it, but I don't think it's sort of a warlike concept. But for me, I would say this, but it always comes down to leadership. And I think that the success of a culture, of a community, of a civilization is not on one particular leader. It's the leaders that they continuously generate. It's not about the one hero leader who takes everyone up to great and glory and then falls apart. I mean, my hero is Alexander the Great, but then the people who succeeded him didn't do, it collapsed into the different parts of the Alexandrian Empire. And so I think it's about assuring the continuous succession of strong, effective leaders who have legitimacy in terms of being elected or being somehow representative of their people is the only way to secure that contiguous trusting environment. So for me, it becomes a question of how getting the right leaders in place and then ensuring the pipeline of securing the next generation of leaders ever after.
Good. Just a couple comments just to wrap it up. Number one, this means that there's a lot more to discuss. So thank you for setting up one more topic for discussion. And the other is that it reminds me again of my graduate school days, because something that I learned in political psychology were the workshops that were being done, the problem solving, reconciliation, the forgiveness workshops that take place behind the scenes in a lot of these warring situations to do just what you're saying, Gediminas, as to how can we now start building trust on the human level. And the most difficult part is to get to forgiveness. And that's very difficult in a political situation where we have this background where we want to have revenge. How do we move beyond revenge to forgiveness? Which is another topic that I would like us to talk about. If you are in a situation where it is warring and it has broken down, how do we start to rebuild that working trust? And sometimes forgiveness is one of the first places to start, which is one of the more difficult emotional elements for us to exercise in human behavior.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. It's been a great discussion. We talked about how important it is to understand ourselves before we try to understand the others, and then we can work all together for a creative solution. We talked about how important confrontation is to solve, to be able to share and be all happy from the result of the negotiation. And even in a situation like a war, the trust that is so critical for a good result, leadership and forgiveness are some keys that you can actually rebuild trust and manage to achieve the results that are good for both parties. Thank you very much for being here with us. We'll talk with you again for the next session. Thank you.
Online around the world, this is Thunderbird Knowledge Network, negotiating with the power of understanding.